Democrats to make sure that that happens.
President Trump's chief of staff, Reince Priebus, stressing the issue of loyalty and extending an olive branch to Democrats there in the wake of the House's failed efforts to undo Obamacare last week. Some might say the White House was directly calling out those who stood in public opposition to that legislation, including perhaps my next guest. Joining me now, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. Senator, good evening. Good to have you here tonight. What do you make of that? I mean, there's an indication that the White House has sort of thrown up their hands and said, you know what, no more dealing with the House Freedom Caucus. We're going to try to do some outreach to Democrats.
You know, I think loyalty and fidelity are very important, but, you know, I think our loyalty should be to our oath, you know, to uphold the Constitution. As conservatives, to believe in fiscal conservatism and federalism, that most power really should remain with the states and the people. So I think you'll find the House Freedom Caucus to be among the most honorable and principled men and women in Congress. But I don't think there's a question of loyalty when we're talking about principle. I do think there's a way out of this, though. I think the House leadership bit off more than they can chew. They wanted this huge bill to pass that had a lot of things that were objectionable to conservatives. What if we start with a more modest bill, start with a bill that has very little in it except for what everyone agrees, every Republican agrees, and then build from there. And I think that approach actually would work better.
Well, I mean, what do you say to those who say you got a lot of what you wanted in this bill? Maximum income to receive tax credit, allow states to choose between traditional block grants, which I know is something that you talked a lot about. The list goes on in terms of requirements for able-bodied adults to be able to get Medicaid. If they can work, they have to work. $1 trillion in Obamacare taxes. A lot of folks say, you know, they really met those folks in the Freedom Caucus pretty much halfway.
I think what we started with is we stuffed a lot of stuff into a bill that was objectionable. Obamacare Light was objectionable. It became less bad over time. I agree with you. So I think the bill was headed in the right direction. That's why I still think compromise is possible on this. But I think we ought to start with what we all agree on. Virtually all of us agree on repealing the taxes, repealing the individual mandate. Why don't we put a list of things before all of us and say, hey, what are the things that we generally all agree to, instead of putting before us things that we didn't like the Cadillac tax, subsidies, Medicaid expansion,
and I think a lot of people
to allow Medicaid expansion.
Really like the ideas that you have put forth, but you know, I think now they look at it and say, so you know, all of those very pure ideologies are admirable, and you talk about the honor of the Republican Freedom Caucus as you see it. But if you can't get it across the finish line, what good is it really?
Well, I think we can. I'm still optimistic, actually. I don't think this is over. And I just came from a meeting with House conservatives and Senate conservatives where we are still working and talking to everyone about this issue. We're still reaching out to the White House, frankly, on this issue, and we'll continue to meet with them. So I think there is a solution. But I think the way to look at this is, do we have to have everything, or can we start out with what we agree on? Rather than forcing everybody into a box where it says, oh, moderates are going to have to accept this, and conservatives are going to have to accept this. Maybe there's a lot of common ground that we aren't just finding our common ground and having a less expansive bill, and maybe we have a more modest repeal bill that just includes the things that we all think should be repealed.
I mean, I understand that you're hopeful, and there are some signs that people do hope that this isn't dead and that you can get somewhere. But then you have people like Governor Kasich from Ohio on the Hill today with Representative Dent, Nancy Pelosi speaking out and saying, you know what, we would be willing to listen. So in the end, if that's the coalition that forms, you may wish that your folks had gone along with this deal.
We'll be surprised if you see Democrats cooperating on repeal of Obamacare. This is a Republican chance to repeal Obamacare. Obamacare is a disaster, and I think ultimately we're going to find a consensus. But it takes time. I mean, 17 days is not very long.
How much time would you need?
Well, nobody can predict when we all come to an agreement, but I can say that I think the forces are still moving towards an agreement, and as we speak, there are people on Capitol Hill still talking about an agreement, and we haven't given up on this. I promise you that the House Freedom Caucus, the Senate conservatives, we do want repeal. That's what we've run on, but we didn't run on replacing Obamacare with another federal program.
All right, Senator Rand Paul, always good to have you with us. Thank you very much. So coming up next, a popular